Welcome back to America Decides. It's Vice President Kamala Harris and her allies are rallying in Pennsylvania this evening. President Biden making the case for Supreme Court reform in Austin, Texas. Let's bring in Pennsylvania Democratic State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. He is the Democratic nominee in the race to be Pennsylvania's next Auditor General. Great to see you. Thanks for being here on America Decides. This talk of Supreme Court, great to have you. Thank you. This talk of Supreme Court reform, you've run in Pennsylvania numerous times. You know the voters in Pennsylvania. What does this mean for activating the Democratic electorate and for the campaign at large in your state?
You know, part of what the president laid out so well today is the lack of trust and faith that folks have in the Supreme Court. You know, Pennsylvanians are pretty common sense folks. It doesn't make much sense that you have Supreme Court justices ruling on January 6 cases like Justice Thomas when his wife was actually, actively involved in a lot of the activities that we saw around January 6. Justice Alito's wife was flying the American flag upside down in violation of the flag code. You have these justices, again, back to Clarence Thomas, who were taking trips from billionaires who have active cases before the Supreme Court and then ruling on cases. That doesn't make much sense. That smells of corruption. And frankly, the court has to not only be above reproach, but it has to be seen as being above reproach. This court is full of members that are the most extreme. And I don't think I'm speaking out of school here when I say that we will look back at the Trump versus United States of America case as one of the worst decisions since probably Dred Scott.
Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, do you believe he would put Pennsylvania in the Democratic column if he ended up on the ticket?
Listen, Josh Shapiro is a great friend. He's been an incredible governor. And the good news for us as Democrats is Vice President Harris has been vice president. And so she knows exactly what it takes to be the type of partner that she's been for President Biden for 3.5 years, getting important things done. But to go back to getting important things done, I've been able to do that with our governor the entire time he's been in office. Just a couple of weeks ago, we passed the single largest investment in K-12 education in Pennsylvania history. We just lowered the cost of prescription drugs by doing reforms of our pharmacy benefit managers. And so if the vice president wants a partner that can help her get things done, I think you have to look no further than Josh Shapiro. You know, I serve in the only legislative body in the country that has a divided legislature. And so that means that we have to work across the aisle to get bipartisan solutions, but also it means we have to be unequivocal about leading in a way that makes life better for working people and working families. And I think the vice president has laid out a vision for working people and working families. And what she needs is a partner that can help her execute it. I think Josh Shapiro is well adept at doing just that.
And finally here, State Representative, when you look at the map of Pennsylvania, where do you believe Vice President Harris needs to spend the most time? Is it about rallying Democratic turnout in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh? Is it about trying to make inroads in central Pennsylvania, going up to Scranton, President Biden's hometown, and looking to really rally union members there? What's the top priority in your view?
Listen, I just got back from a 5-day, 10-county tour from Northwest Pennsylvania through the Pennsylvania wilds down to central Pennsylvania. And one thing we should not miss in this moment is the absolute excitement that the vice president has unleashed all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I was in some of the most rural parts of Pennsylvania where I spend a lot of time, where it's not easy to be a Democrat, where frankly, your life would be much easier if you just registered as an independent or a moderate Republican. But you have people who are being reminded by the vice president of their power to not just be shaped by events, but to shape events. And people are showing up in numbers that I've never seen. As you mentioned, I've run statewide before. I know a thing or two about Pennsylvania, and I know that this energy that we're seeing in this moment is like nothing we've ever seen before. The vice president is bringing our party together because that's what she's always done. And so I think the vice president is well equipped to win this state. But I think anybody who knows Pennsylvania knows if you want to win Pennsylvania, you better spend some time in Erie. You better spend some time in Northampton County. and you better be well positioned to get massive turnout in Philadelphia and the collar counties. And our vice president has visited all of those places, is well known, and is generating a type of enthusiasm in those communities that I have never seen in my entire, over half decade being involved in elective politics.
State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta of Pennsylvania, thank you. We appreciate it. Now let's bring in our reporter panel, Molly Ball and Josh Gerstein. Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Josh, a senior legal affairs reporter for Politico. Josh, I want to begin with you, and let's first listen to something Senator Lindsey Graham had to say on Face the Nation on Sunday.
Every day, it comes out, Vance has done something more extreme, more weird, more erratic. Vance seems to be more erratic and more extreme than President Trump. And I'll bet President Trump is sitting there scratching his head and wondering, why did I pick this guy?
Well, we'll get to that in a moment. That's Senator Chuck Schumer of New York talking about J.D. Vance, taking his shot at J.D. Vance. Not unusual, but Senator Lindsey Graham said on Face the Nation that Supreme Court reform is dead on arrival in the Senate. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, used those exact words. What's your take on the legal aspect of what's being proposed here, Josh, by President Biden? 18-year term limits. Is this something that has a historic precedent? How do you see it as a legal reporter?
Well, I mean, it seems to me there's pretty formidable obstacles to any of this actually happening. And so I think that has to be acknowledged, like right off the bat. Even the White House is admitting that some of this requires a constitutional amendment to change the decision on immunity would require that. And some legal scholars think even the term limits proposal requires constitutional amendment. Unless the Senate drops its filibuster rule for legislation, it's going to be hard for any of this to actually take place. But I don't think that means it's not significant. I mean, because Biden was so strenuously opposed to this when it was proposed originally in the last campaign cycle. He pretty much gave a hard no on it, despite sort of taking some shots from people on the left because he gave a hard no on it. So for him to now say, well, I'm in favor of it, is a pretty significant reversal. And I think it does indicate that his thinking on the subject has shifted. His people will say it's because the Supreme Court has done things over the last 3.5 years to provoke him that they had not done before.
Molly, on a political level, he's not advocating, President Biden, to expand the court. And that's something many progressives would like to see. Critics call it packing the court. But he is calling for term limits, code of ethics. What's your read on it, that kind of proposal, what it means about where the president is politically in his final few months in his term?
Yeah, well, I think, as Josh said, he has not gone all the way to the left in terms of calling for court packing, but he has gone much further than anywhere that he has been in the past. And I think that says a couple of things. I think, first of all, the president proposed this at a time when he still expected to be the candidate, and he saw this as a political move that could help to energize the Democratic base. As Representative Kenyatta just testified to, that's not a problem that the Democrats feel like they have anymore, but it very much was a problem that presidential candidate Joe Biden was having as recently as a couple of weeks ago. And so to extend these sort of olive branches to the left was part of his strategy to try to increase that enthusiasm that he didn't really have for his own candidacy. But I do think that it also fits with the theme of his increasing concern about the structures of American democracy. And, a Republican like Lindsey Graham might say you can't claim to be concerned about the integrity of American institutions if you're involved in tearing them down. But from the perspective, I think, of many Democrats, it's the court that has violated longstanding norms and needs to be reined in by the other branches. And that's sort of what the separation of powers is all about.
Let's play a clip from former President Trump. He's talking to an evangelical audience, and he's talking about voting. Let's listen.
They all say, I think he's changed. I think he's changed since 2 weeks ago. Something affected him. No, I haven't changed. Maybe I've gotten worse, actually, because I get angry at the incompetence that I witness every single day.
And at that same event, he said, quote, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. Josh, you're a legal reporter. there's been this Supreme Court ruling on presidential power. Many critics of former President Trump look at his quotes at that rally, and they say this is a president who could be unbound if he wins another term. What's the significance of what the Supreme Court did, and what's your read as a reporter on the kind of presidency Trump's articulating could be on the horizon?
Well, I mean, my view on the decision that came out on immunity, which was on July 1st, which sort of feeds into all this, is that the sort of center block on the court, which we should stress is a much more conservative court than it used to be, so the center block is pretty conservative, decided they were far more concerned about the prospect of future presidents being harassed by criminal litigation or threats of criminal prosecution after they left office than they were basically about the Trump threat here, which is the possibility that he would intentionally do things that he was told was illegal while he was president. And, you know, that was one of the main concerns that was raised in front of the Supreme Court. And the three justices that are often seen as sitting closer to the center of the court, that would be Justice Kavanaugh, Chief Justice Roberts, and perhaps Justice Barrett, they all seem to be more concerned about that other issue of future prosecutions and presidents being encumbered than they were about sort of the worst interpretation of the comments that the former president recently made about there possibly being no need to vote for anyone after the current election cycle, which, if you take it in a literal sense, is obviously pretty ominous.
We have to leave it there. Molly, I can't believe I don't have time to ask you about the vice presidential search. I need the Molly Ball take. She'll have to come back soon. Please come back soon. Josh Gerstein, Molly Ball, are two of our favorites.